Okay, welcome back. This is going to be our last PowerPoint in our evolution unit. So we're going to be talking about how and why new species originate. So this process is going to be called speciation. Speciation is the development or creation of new species. So first, we're going to talk about what actually is a species. A species is a population whose members can interbreed and produce viable, fertile offspring, meaning that two organisms have to be able to mate, have a baby, and that baby has to be able to live and have its own offspring. That means they are reproductively compatible enough to mate and have normal babies. So the formation of new species, again, like I said, the process of the creating new species is called speciation. And this happens when populations become reproductively isolated. So new species are created when populations are reproductively isolated. And then the populations are going to evolve independently from the one they came from. And that is going to lead to divergence between the two species, accumulating various changes, making them unique, therefore making a completely new species. So again, speciation is the creation of new species. It happens when one population becomes isolated from the others, and then that population will evolve independently and eventually diverge, creating a new species. And these, we're going to talk about several different mechanisms of isolation. There are going to be biological or geographical barriers. And these barriers are going to impede the members from producing offspring. So they're either going to be biological or physical barriers that prevent two organisms from mating and having offspring. And we're going to talk about four different types of isolation. The first one is geographic. The second one is temporal. The third, behavioral. And then the last one is mechanical. We're going to talk about each one in detail, and we're going to start with geographic isolation. So geographic isolation occurs when species live in different areas and there is some type of physical barrier. So the example that we have here are going to be squirrels living at the Grand Canyon. So one type of squirrel lives in the canyon's south rim, a few miles away. From there, you're going to have another squirrel living on the other side of the Grand Canyon. So this would be, they are separated by the Grand Canyon. So there's a barrier right in the middle. Now your geographic barrier, it could be a river, things living on two sides of a river. It could be an ocean. It could be an island. It could be anything that's going to physically separate two organisms right down the middle so they can't even get near each other is geographic isolation. So if there was a mountain in between two groups of squirrels, that would be geographic isolation. So any type of physical barrier that splits two organisms apart so they're not even close enough to think about mating. The next type of isolation is called temporal isolation. temporal isolation is when species are going to breed during different times of the day or different seasons or different years even. So it's when they don't mate during the same time of the year. So the example we have here are skunks. So skunks, one skunk mates during winter and the other mates during summer. If the two skunk species don't mate at the same time, if they're not mating at the same time, they're not having babies together. So even if the skunks are near and live around each other, if they're not mating together because they mate during different times, then they're not having babies together, therefore they're different species. They're going to be different, too different to have babies. So not breeding or mating at the same time of year or season or day is going to mean they're not mating together. So if one mates in the winter, one mates in the summer, obviously they aren't mating together, they're not having babies, and they're different species. Another type of isolation is behavioral isolation. A lot of this comes down to courtship behaviors. And we talked about this a little bit last time, and that's how different species are going to have different rituals on how they attract mates. It could be singing a song or doing a dance or having some type of specific trait that the mate looks for. One example we have on our screen here is that of blue-footed boobies, and they have to mate only after they do some type of courtship display or dance. So let's say some birds do a dance to attract mate. Now the thing is, if the bird does not do the right dance for the female, he's not going to be having babies together. They're not going to be mating. So if two birds look very similar, but they do different dances to attract a mate, they have to do the right dance for the female in order to be able to mate. So if they're not doing the right courtship behavior, singing the right song, doing the right dance, or having big enough antlers, then they're not going to be able to mate. And that's going to create isolation between them. Therefore, they're not going to be the same species. All right, and our last type, the fourth type that we're going to talk about, is mechanical isolation, and these are going to be morphological differences that prevent successful mating. For many insects, the male and female sex organs are not closely related enough to actually work. So for many insects, male and female sex organs of closely related species do not fit together, and if they don't fit together, then they can't mate. So you have to have the right parts in order to mate. So if there's some type of physical difference that prevents mating, then they obviously cannot have offspring together, and that's going to lead to isolation. Now, there are two ways in which new species are created. There's two schools of thought on this. The first school of thought is called gradualism, and the second school of thought is called punctuated equilibrium. So let's look at gradualism first. The process of gradualism is a way that scientists look at evolution as being a gradual process or slow process. Meaning, gradualism states that Evolution happens slowly but continuously over long periods of time. And this is going to assume that big changes occur as an accumulation of many small ones. So things change only because many small things changed in the process. So gradualism states that evolution happens slowly but continuously over time. Now, this was an old idea. Very few scientists actually believe in gradualism anymore. It has been since proven incorrect. And we're going to talk about why here in a second. So this process has been proven incorrect. And it's been replaced by the idea of gradual or punctuated equilibrium. So punctuated equilibrium is a process that scientists now believe is the way that evolution occurs. And it says that evolution occurs in rapid bursts of change. So it's a model of evolution that says evolution happens in periods of rapid change, but in the middle, nothing changes. So species undergo rapid change when they first bud from their parent population, and then after that, they stay the same. So, and this proves or shows to be more what we see today. And scientists have figured this out based on looking at the fossil record, anatomical differences, as well as putting that all on a timeline with when these changes happened. And it seems to support the idea that evolution happens when there's some type of change. There's something happens to cause organisms to need to change. They change really quickly, and then they'll stay the same until they're forced to change again. So the graph would look more similar to this, which is what we see when we look at a timeline. So we see an organism existed, it stayed the same. Something happened, change occurred rapidly, and then the organism stayed the same until something happened and they had to change again. So this supports the idea that evolution happens in rapid bursts when change is needed, and then that organism is going to stay the same until it's forced to have to change again. They don't just change because, they change because something happens. They change in response to something. It's not random. And the scientist who discovered this was named Stephen Jay Gould. He was a Harvard paleontologist and worked with evolution. And he created the model of punctuated equilibrium. So he is the guy who created the current theory. So just to conclude, only evolution explains both the unity and diversity of life, attributing to the diversity of life to natural causes rather than creationism. There are strong, different scientific foundations that suggest that evolution is true. However, it is only a theory, meaning that something could happen to cause the theory to change, kind of like the idea from gradualism to punctuated equilibrium. Some new data came up that supported the change of ideas. All right, there's going to be practice on this on